Welcome to the Free to Be show with Cordelia Gaffar. On the Free to Be show, we explore and discover ourselves. What is it that is stopping us from being free to self accept, to have self compassion, to have self forgiveness, and most importantly, to show up in the world as powerfully as we possibly can? During each episode, I will interview people who have just chosen to be free, to be themselves. Now for tonight's
Okay,
show.
so today on the Free to Be show, I'm so excited to have Cara Morillo. Look, and I didn't even confirm the way to pronounce your name. Did I botch your name?
No, you can say it that way.
Okay.
It's just, yeah.
um, and the reason why I'm excited to have you is because I met you at Behold Her conference back in November, and your workshop, although I was late, was about radical self-care, and I was just like, oh, this is so wonderful. I love it, And, as we're looking towards Valentine's Day, a lot of times this is another time of year when we lose ourselves, right? Because we want to show our love and appreciation for someone else, but we forget to pour back into ourselves. So I'm super excited to have you on today. And just to let you viewers and listeners know a little bit about her, Dr. Cara Morillo is a feminist scholar, educator, speaker, and facilitator. And she really is promoted, she promotes feminism and social awareness through the power of literature and mindful language, diversity and gender equality. So I love the fact also that you're a professor of language and literature, because I love to read. But you introduced me to a new author, and we'll talk about that a lot later. So anyway, with all that, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. So please just tell us what's been your journey with self-care, and why are you drawn to share on this topic?
Well, I'll bring up Audrey a little bit earlier than I
Okay.
anticipated. So I was introduced to work because I was at home during college. But I left home. I went to SUNY Buffalo, and I was about 7 hour drive away from home, and it was a very intense program. So I did my master's at SUNY Buffalo, and there I met Dr. Alexis Javot, and I took her course on Black feminisms and the reimagination of I think American literature it was called, something like that. It's been a while now. And Lorde's work really resonated with me. And a lot of the feminists from that time period who were really working from the 60s through the 80s, they really infused their politics with a spiritual practice. And when I look back now at my own spiritual practices and self-care, it was always in the literature.
Hmm.
And these words always spoke to me, and I felt like they showed me a way of being aware of not just myself, but of other people in the world who were different from me. But also how to, if you are going to commit yourself to social awareness and social justice, you do have to give back. And I got it intellectually, but it took a very long time to put into practice.
Yeah.
And I can't even say I was really practicing self-care when I was in grad school the first time, because it was just very stressful. They wanted us to be done in a year. So I experienced a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. And so I really didn't put it into momentum until I returned back to New Jersey, and I was introduced to yoga by a friend. And I started doing yoga in a gym, and then that was 15 years ago, and it's evolved. And so my journey with literature and with feminist literature has always intertwined with my yoga journey as well. So that's how I think I started self-care. Was reading about it first and then actually putting into practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's if I think about my self-care journey, it's probably the same. It's so easy. That's a really great point that you got it intellectually before you actually put it into practice, because in theory everything makes sense, but just like, you know, knowing the path and walking the path, it's like two different things entirely. So you said also that you experienced anxiety when I guess you were getting your master's. Did you know you were experiencing anxiety at that point? I mean, were you that self-aware or?
I'm not sure. I knew I was feeling anxious. I think now that I'm out of grad school for good, um, I just think things started happening after 9/11, and I hope that's not a trigger for anyone, but the university really started changing after 9/11, and there was an anxiety that we wouldn't need as many scholars, that we wouldn't have as many jobs. So that has stayed a bigger part of the university environment that I've had to contend with
Hmm.
even up until now. So I think if I hadn't found yoga when I did, I wouldn't have been able to pursue the doctorate.
Wow.
Yeah, because I just really think it's becomes very endemic to that environment. Um, and I don't know that it's anyone's. I think it's bigger than all of us. Is what I mean to say, and I think it connects a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a good point, and thank you for, saying that you hope it's not a trigger for anyone, because we never know who's listening and, how their life has been affected in general. But um this recognizing our political environment, and not that it's any better than it was 20 years ago, um and in relation to needing to take care of ourselves, is kind of where I want to go with what you just answered to my question. Is, so when we're in times that are high stress and there's so much ambiguity and insecurity, and I'm not talking about like security checks, whether or not you could fly or anything, but I mean, just like, is our economy going to be okay? Um, our jobs going to be secure, and those kind of things. What is what is something that you found that's helpful for you to, I mean, besides yoga, you did touch on spiritual practices that you found in literature. I know a lot of people see yoga as a spiritual practice, which it is, as well as its movement, and so much deeper. Like, the
Hmm.
more you, I'm sure at this point, 15 years in, you really understand the practices of yoga. But I mean, what other things can we do um, if we don't realize that we're really being affected?
I think doing a gut check and listening to your body, and I am not going to act like I've mastered this at all. Because there are still days where I really just have to sit with myself and say, this is how I need to feel today, and I'm going to feel it for an hour, or maybe I just need to feel it all day, and tomorrow's a new day. But I think being brutally honest with your feelings and not having to hide behind the guise of positivity or whether you're being negative. Because if you have friends that they think you're being negative because you're actually feeling what you're supposed to be feeling in a particular circumstance, then they're not the person you go to for that kind of support. Maybe they're great for going out and experiencing social life, and maybe that's who they are for you. But allowing yourself to have space to really feel what you're feeling, I tend to name it or write it down in a journal. And if it's really getting to me physically, because I know I personally hold a lot of my emotions physically, movements. So the yoga asanas, I go for a walk. I try to pay very close attention to the environment. So I don't want to date this podcast, but I try to pay attention to what's happening seasonally.
Right.
So in the fall, what color are the leaves? In the winter, what's happening with the tree buds? in the spring, what's emerging then. So that just brings me back into the present.
Okay.
And then dance as well, but mostly just sitting and being really honest with myself and knowing if I need to be my own support system that day, or if there's someone else I can call, whether it's a professional or a friend or a family member, who can help me with that.
I really like the way you defined being in the present, because we hear that so much. It's like, okay, what does that mean? And you're just like, by doing these things, connecting with nature and looking at my surroundings, it helps me to be in the present. So whatever it is for each one of us, that is a very wonderful thing to do. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and pets and children will bring you back into the present if you're too far gone from the present. They're like, feed me right now. I need to take care of these needs right now. So they do that for you too.
Yeah, that's the truth. We don't have pets anymore, but we still have little kids. So like my teenagers, they don't really help me stay in the present too much. I don't really see them, but my little kids, they definitely help me with that. So
Yeah.
so thank you for sharing your personal self-care journey, and what you've been doing and what you're doing now. And I want to take a little bit of a break, and then we'll come back and really dive into the deeper portion of this, where we'll get into some of the work of Lorde, right?
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll be right back. All right, and so we're back, and we're going to get more into some literature surrounding radical self-care. So take it away.
So first and foremost, with Audre Lorde's quote on self-care, it's become extremely popular in this particular decade. So her quote, self-care, so caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is, oh man, I forgot. I might have to do that one over. But she talks about caring for myself not being self-indulgent, but it's
Right.
an act of political warfare. So she talks about it
Wow.
being self-preservation, an act of self-preservation, and that's an act of political warfare. I'm sorry I botched that quote. It's very popular. So it's become more and more popularized in this decade, and it circulates a lot around Instagram. I'm not really sure about Twitter, but also Facebook. And I noticed that it became viral. And I also noticed, as a literature teacher, that when these quotes are taken out of context, they become devoid of their politics. So, so when I was developing this workshop for the self-worth conference we're both went to, I really wanted to recontextualize what this quote meant, because it's really used in the wellness community quite a bit. And so much so that self-care has become even separated from Audre Lorde's quote and just turned into a hashtag on Instagram.
Wow.
And what's really happened, and this is more of the background, what's really happened is that we have these self-care Sundays now. And I think it's great if people want to create rituals for themselves and create habits, but self-care isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's very boring. Sometimes it's what you work into the mundane. But also, when we just have hashtag self-care, separated from the quote, separated from the larger body of work that Audre Lorde wrote, we really lose a sense of what she was talking about. And Audre Lorde self-identified as a Black feminist, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet. And when you're taking pictures of, I don't know, of your routine, you stage a very pretty picture of, your tea and your mask and your bubble bath. I don't think those are inherently bad things to do,
Yeah.
but they're not political warfare per se.
No.
And again, I think that that can be subjective, but what was really important for me was that we recontextualize self-care in a Black feminist perspective, because when it's separated from that, we really lose what she was getting at. And for Lorde, and I think I brought this up in the workshop, for Lorde to even give this deeper meaning, she's writing this quote appears in her epilogue of A Burst of Light. So A Burst of Light was a collection of her diaries, her cancer journals towards the end of her life. And she's experiencing her third bout with cancer. So this is really a meditation on her life and what legacy she wants to leave for future generations of people in her community, for women who she saw herself in, and as well as for younger generations, for her children. So to devoid the quote of those politics in that sense of self-care was actually the physical act of taking care of herself so that her work can survive, so that we have it today, and that we can still use it for political resistance, for social awareness, and for growing self-development and self-growth. That in itself is the radical act.
Wow. So I want to pause with that for a minute, because that's like a lot to take in, you know? So let's just kind of breathe that in for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
She was really a political activist,
Yes.
but she had cancer, which prevented her to continue her work. So in order to make sure that her legacy was available for us today, she dialed it back and started to pour into herself so that she was here long enough to complete the work she wanted to do. And I want to just pull something else out of that, because I think it's ironic that she was a Black woman, because today Black women think that being strong is wearing a cape. And I'm sorry if that triggers anybody, but being the strong Black woman is sucking it up and not doing what Audre Lorde did. And I think because people don't, they like, I've never heard of her before, which is sad, you know, because I consider myself well read. I've never heard of her. However, I personally agree with her, because for me, I could not do any of the things I do without having, I call it self-nurturing practices. And I realized that like after I had my second child. And unfortunately, in today's world, we move so fast, we don't understand that. And it's not just being a mother, right? It's just like, if you really want to have an impact on the world, you have to be free to be. And what that means is radical self-care. And it is sometimes an act of war and something you have to stand up for. And what I got from the workshop, I'm going to let you continue in a minute. I'm just getting on my soapbox. What I got from the workshop was that she stood powerfully for that, but not in like an angry or what is that called? Not in a way that is combative, right? It didn't seem combative to me, the way you would disagree, I guess.
I think the word isn't combative, but the word, it would maybe, she wasn't afraid to be confrontational.
Yes.
So she was a very prominent writer. She was a very prominent speaker. She was a professor of writing. She was a trained librarian, and she experienced a lot of popularity during her time on this earth. And a lot of, this was the height of the feminist movements. And I'm saying this plural because there are multiple feminist
Yeah.
movements, and she very much aligned with Black feminism and called herself a Black feminist. And there were times she does talk about the uses of anger. So in Sister Outsider, she talks about what it means to be angry and how do we channel that anger into, you know, not to let it fester, but to turn it into either change for social good or social justice. Because she's, you know, as a Black woman, she writes that there was a lot to be angry about.
Oh, yeah.
So she did not shy away from that at all. But her writing and her work provides people with the guide of what to do with those emotions, especially when you are politically engaged and you are aware. And she was very devoted to the Black community, and she was very devoted to the Black lesbian community. And she was very much about people celebrating their culture and seeing themselves for who they are and having the power and strength to be who they are. So that is what she wanted, to return a lot of her energy back to her community. But there were people who tried to appropriate her, and there were times she was angry with white feminists, which I would just recommend that, again, people read Sister Outsider, her letter to Mary Daly, and also do some research, maybe online, to see what the political climate was at the time and also what the context of what she was writing in. But she was certainly angry, and she was angry in this essay because it's a part of the grief process.
Yeah.
And she recognized that she was not going to survive. The possibility was there that she wasn't going to survive this time. And that is a natural part of grieving. So it was, if she wanted to have work remaining, for her words remaining for future generations and for her community, then she really needed to protect her body and her health. So I hope that that clarifies things. But she was no stranger to anger, and she was, you know, about using it in a very powerful way for change, not for self-destruction.
Right. That's really what I was saying about the anger, because I mean, even in my work with Replenish Me, the program that I offer, when I talk about anger, I say to use it as a power source, because there's wisdom in that, right? When there's something we're really passionate about, we get angry about it, and we don't have to kill ourselves with the anger. So I totally agree with her, you know, channeling it and guiding it, and, or in her case, offering a guide to future generations on how to use it. Yes, that is definitely something that we need more of now, because I think we've lost it. You know, we don't know where to go with it. What we do now is we seem to hide it, numb it, or, you know, just avoid it. Or if there's the other end of that, like we just explode and we don't do anything positive with it. So yeah. And so let's talk a little bit more about her grieving process, because again, even though we're going towards Valentine's Day, right, this is also a time when people grieve, right? They may have lost a spouse, or, you know, other loved one, or they just may have lost a sense of self. So it seems like in this case, she was grieving losing herself. Am I misunderstanding? Okay.
I think absolutely she was grieving a part of herself that she was going to lose, that she wasn't going to be around for her children for the rest of their lives. She was grieving having to lose her partner. So the essay, A Burst of Light, which again are her journal entries, which she's edited. She didn't just give the public free rein
Oh, of
to
course.
her journal entries, was about that vulnerability that I talked about in the workshop. And that vulnerability of letting others see that you're hurting, particularly the people that she trusted, and in those spaces. So also in the workshop, I talked about people having safe spaces, and particularly communities of color having safe spaces where they can feel the range of their emotions. So she was very much celebrated, and this is a passage in A Burst of Light. She was very much celebrated in the Black lesbian community. And because she was such a persona and she was such a force, she was used to being seen as a force. But she knew that with her having to grieve herself, that she needed to really let others know that, okay, this is who I am and this is what I'm experiencing right now. So there's a real sense of vulnerability in this essay where I talked about allowing yourself to be seen, having those spaces where you can be seen, finding those people who you trust enough to say, this is what's going on with me. I don't think everyone deserves that, right?
Oh,
But for her, it was my interpretation that it was the matter of her being her persona, which to a degree she needed to be to carry out a certain role, and also acknowledging that there are limits to her body and to her health.
wow. That is just so powerful. Acknowledging that there's limits to her body and her health. Because, we are really souls in a physical body. And, our souls could just go on forever and try and do that work. But just recognizing her mortality, right? And I guess to some extent, this is just coming to me now. Maybe that's really the way we should view self-care. Recognizing our mortality, we're not going to live forever. So, in each day, what can we do to preserve our health and make ourselves consistent in whatever it is that we're up to in the world?
Well, absolutely. And I pulled back from her essay and I tried to think about what she spoke about and what also resonates with me. And I feel like if it resonates with me, it'll resonate with other people. But again, she allowed herself pleasure. So not having this fatalistic, yes, I mean, we're all going to have our time when we expire on this planet, but allowing ourselves to experience joy. And also I really like the work of the younger feminist, Adrienne Maree Brown. I'm saying younger, she's my age, but she's from this generation. So I didn't say that to diminish her at all, but Adrienne Maree Brown talks about pleasure activism, which is based on Audre Lorde's concept of the erotic. And Lorde very much talked about enjoying life and being in tune with the flow of life, and being in the present. And in later on in this essay, A Burst of Light, what can I do now? She says, even if I don't have control over what's happening to my body, I can at least dance.
Yeah.
And she leaves in these entries where she's dancing with people that she loves and enjoying her body as well, even though she knows that it has its limits. But it wasn't going to stop her from dancing. It wasn't going to stop her from listening to music. It wasn't going to stop her from experiencing the joy of the sea. So she really brings in all these sensual aspects as well, where she says, yes, there's this aspect to my life, but also I have the choice to live pleasurably while I am here on this earth. So it's not this doomsday type of essay at all. Rather, I think it brings out the complexities of one's emotions. And also, again, where are you limited, and where can you make a conscious choice to do what you can on this earth with the time you have?
I love that. And another part of the workshop, you also gave us some journal entry or questions. So do you mind sharing like one or two of those? I don't want to put you on the spot because I know like when you asked me, what should I have prepared? I didn't like mention that, but I'm thinking that would be helpful for people to process this episode.
Sure. Yes. So I really encourage people to get into their bodies because a lot of this is very intellectual. And when you're reading, it's very intellectual. So I always encourage people to do a mind body practice. It's taking a few deep breaths, maybe putting your hand on your belly and feeling it move in and out, your breath move in and out, feeling your feet on the ground. So getting back into your body, because Lorde talks about this. She says she must listen to her body. Our bodies are offering us the wisdom for what we need for self-care. It's not going to look the same every day. It's not going to look the same every year of your life. Even if you do have a practice, it's going to evolve as you do. So what I would encourage is that, that people who are listening, when they journal, try to feel it in your body rather than think, oh, I should really go to the gym 5 hours a week. So, because that's intellectualizing. And if that's what does it for you, I think that's great. But, is your body telling you that, or is that coming from a different source? So just taking a few deep breaths, reconnecting with your body, having a pen and paper or pen and journal handy, and then writing one daily or weekly self-care practice. Just name it. Don't, whatever comes to you first. And if you don't have one, think of one that you would like to incorporate into your life. And then once you've written that down, ask yourself, how do you know it's self-care? Name how you feel. And why I say that is because sometimes people do things out of guilt or shame. Well, I ate that cake, so now I'm going to have to run the treadmill for 50 minutes or what have you. And are you going to feel better about yourself? Or is that just a practice that you have to get the juices flowing and, the endorphins in your body? Is that just something you do for yourself because it feels good? And if you do it because it feels good, I think that's great. But if you're doing it out of a sense of shame or guilt, I'm not going to tell you what to feel, but ask yourself, why do you feel that way? Where's that coming from? And then also, I like for people to be really honest about what they need to feel restored after a challenging day or week. So what do you need to feel restored after a challenging day or week? And in your journal, just name it. It can be a few things, but name one or two practices, habits, actions, or behaviors. And hopefully it's not a purchase.
Right.
You may need to purchase tools, but if we get into the habit of consuming products without thinking about what they do for us, how they restore our sense of well-being, then that's when it becomes a little muddled, I think.
Yeah.
And then I have a few.
Well, let's just like pause with those two, and then we'll give two more, because I think I liked these particular journal exercises during the workshop, and I encourage our listeners and viewers, that whether you're watching this on the YouTube or listening on the iTunes, to like write these journal entries down. And if it's not your practice to journal, right, this is a really great, these are really great prompts to start with. And if you tend to not journal because it seems too intellectual for you, then I think this is another reason why the way Dr. Morillo is presenting it to us makes it easier. I mean, like for myself, there's some days where I'm just like, I'm not writing in my journal because I'm just all up in my body. I don't have words for what's going on. But at the same time, I want some form of documentation for those feelings, so that if it happens again, I want to know how to take care of myself,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that these two journal prompts that you just gave us are like massive. So grounding and getting into your body and feeling stuff, and then recognizing, are these your thoughts, right? What's the source? Is that you repeating some judgment from somebody else, or some shaming from somebody else, or do you really believe that? So I like that. But definitely, yeah, if you can share like two more journal prompts, because I want this to be like an educational episode, for people to really, to your earlier points about taking self-care out of context, and thinking of it as a spa day and stuff like that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was soaking in a seaweed bath this morning. But, it's not always, that's not always self-care for me. Sometimes it's just screaming and crying, like you said, it's not pretty. So just recognizing the range of what self-care is. And sometimes it is just, dancing with my baby girls, right? Dancing with people you love. These are all forms of self-care.
Mhm.
So, okay. So just please, can you share two more? Do you mind?
Sure.
Thank you.
So after you have all that written down, or if you need something else, what do you need personally when you are feeling unwell, physically, mentally, or emotionally? What do you need personally when you are feeling unwell, physically, mentally, or emotionally? Name it.
So good. I like that one.
And it can be hard to identify because sometimes people don't have time to think about it.
Yeah.
And then finally, this came to me during the workshop because I realized that Lorde was a lot about celebrating her life and experiencing joy when she could. Finally, after that, what brings you joy?
Mhm.
Write it down. What brings you joy? Name one thing, name five things. What, or maybe it's a person, maybe it's an action, maybe it's an animal, maybe it's a human. I don't know. What brings you joy? And do you allow yourself time to experience that joy?
Yeah, that's a really good one too. I mean, after your workshop, I don't know, we've been now following each other on social media, but I've here and there mentioned joy. So that's actually my acronym coming into 2020 is joyful, the word joyful. So that is so very important because I think as adults, we do forget that. And I think, a lot of times people are like, you have 6 kids. How do you do that? Well, the great thing is I have 6 kids and they're about 2 or 3 or 4 years apart. So like every 2 or 3 years, I get re-immersed in what it looks like to be joyful because those tiny humans, like they don't have, they are fussy for a really small amount of time, but most of the day they're joyful. And that's the way humans are supposed to be. So that's the great thing about joy. Wow, I really appreciate that. Those journal prompts are super powerful, and I encourage, like I said, our listeners and viewers to just write those down. And it may be a lot for you at first if like self-care is new for you. So I'm not asking you to do all 4 journal entries your first week, but like the first week, try with the first one or whichever one speaks to you the most, and move towards that, and begin on your journey to be free to be. So we'll be right back with the last piece of how to connect more with Dr. Morillo, and what she has to offer. Okay, so we're back, and in this last segment, we want to learn more about how we can connect with you and what you have to offer this year.
Yes, so thanks. So I'm in the process of rebranding and really trying to name what it is I do, but I would like to offer more online courses and as well as in-person workshops because I think that's where we can really create an intimate and honest space.
Yeah.
So those workshops would be in the DC region, DC metro area. But you can go to my website and sign up to follow along. And if you are interested, I will email you updates. And just personally, I would like to continue to offer myself to the wellness community and also to different organizations to have a more mindful diversity practice and more mindful diversity trainings. Even in my own experience as a diversity trainer, um, I always felt like it could be done a different way. And I think that I've learned how, and definitely infusing training with the power of words and writing, um, I believe helps create effective change in organizations, in communities. And once you create change there, you can go out into your community and be an example for others. So.
Absolutely, I agree. So yes, so when we go to your website, it's just your name, right?
It's just my name.
Okay.
Because I knew I was going to change something at some point, and I did. So it's just my name for now. Yeah.
Cool. And then it'll prompt us to sign up for your newsletter,
Yes.
and we can be up to date with everything you have going on. Me personally, since we're both kind of in the DC area, I would kind of like to have you in as an expert at some of my events this year. So we'll talk about that off air. But anyway, you'll see that on my website and her website. So close us out. Give us some golden nuggets, or, because we've really talked about a lot of things during this conversation, and, some things that will help us have a deeper understanding on how to approach self-care and everything, and where to go to get that information. So pull it all together for us.
So I think some things we discussed was being very honest with your feelings, and also being honest where you are in life. Just because you had a self-care practice 5, 10, 15 years ago doesn't mean it's going to look the same. Your needs are going to change over the course of your life as you change, as you mature, as you grow, as different people come into your life, as different circumstances come into your life. So as difficult as it is, check in, deep breaths, feet to the ground, hand to the belly. What does your body need? And allowing that wisdom to come to you through your body, not through the messages that you have in here.
Yeah.
Also, not being afraid to ask for help, not being afraid to be seen by others who support you, and recognizing and honoring those who allow you to be your vulnerable self. Also, go to the doctor or go to a medical practitioner. I think we touched on it only on a cursory level, but I think seeking out those healthcare providers who are advocates for your own health. I brought that up in the workshop. I didn't bring it up explicitly today, but Lorde would have certainly advocated for that. She did advocate for that in this essay, A Burst of Light. And I think it's, having medical practitioners that respect you and advocate for you are a critical part of healthcare, self-care rather, and healthcare. So in closing, I am going to leave you with Lorde's quote from A Burst of Light. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare.
What a beautiful ending. Thank you for that. And I appreciate the reminder about going to healthcare providers as well. That's super important. It's not just men that avoid the doctor. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here and giving us some tools and tips on how to be free to be.
Thank you, Cordelia.
Good night. Show with me, your hostess, Cordelia Gafar. So the purpose of the show really is to give you tools and tips to go on that journey of being free to be yourself. Anything that you enjoyed or you found beneficial, make note of it. Start implementing it. See what it actually feels like to do that. And reach out to me and let me know how you come along with that. Most importantly, if it works for you, it's going to work for somebody else. So remember, sharing is caring. Good night.